What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with the Fall of X, and the Juggernaut stops holding back. So, as always, there will be a link to the Fall of X playlist at the end of this video in case you need to get caught up. But what this does here, before we get to the Juggernaut segment, what it does here is it picks up with Sunfire. Now, I know it doesn't seem to be overly important. This part is dope. And the reason why is because this initially picks up with a mission that Sunfire was sent on. Now, for those of you guys who aren't familiar with this character, Sunfire is like the X-Men version of Johnny Storm from the Fantastic Four. He can set himself on fire. He can get as hot as the sun. He has his own history and all that kind of stuff, right? But he's really, really cool, and he's incredibly powerful. But this mission he was on took place before Krakoa fell to the forces of Orcus. So he doesn't know everything that's happened over the course of Fall of X so far. He's just been out there doing his own thing. And so what ends up happening is he was sent on this mission to basically grab what was called Red Root the Forest. Now, if you're not familiar with Red Root the Forest, it's not overly important here. It's just one of those things where Red Root is part of the mutant population, a relatively important character, but the reality here is that Red Root was needed for what will likely be a plot device over the course of this story at some point in time. The kicker about all this is that Sunfire grabs Red Root, puts it close to his chest, and then it allows Red Root to kind of stay warm, travel, so on and so forth. But when he gets to kind of the destination, which is to say, where he's going to be traveling to for the next leg of his journey, what he does is he comes across this being or this mutant that he had basically paid to give him the location, right, to take him where he was supposed to be. When he crawls through like this giant mouth, effectively, right, it's just one of these weird things, he passes into what's called the void, right, meaning he goes into this place where he has no clue where he's at. We don't even fully know where he's at. But because the journey is so harsh, and God, this is so ridiculously dope, because the journey is so harsh, he ultimately collapses. But then he's met by this colossal figure. And the thing he says here, right, the thing that Sunfire says is he says, "I have failed you, my Iraqi sister. This is the end of all things." And this person responds, "What is an end, my child, if not a beginning? The last seed of Okara needs but one thing to grow: mutant blood." And Sunfire recognizes this person. Now, the whole thing with Okara and Iraqi and all that kind of stuff, we can kind of ignore that for right now, because what this person says is, "The magic has led you to my side once more." And he says, "Be healed, Sunfire, and be prepared, for we will march to war." It's Apocalypse, right? Now, the last we saw with Apocalypse, he had left this other dimension and had basically come back to Earth, or at least to the main Marvel Universe, and he's just been traveling around. What it looks like he's doing here is he's going to turn Sunfire into one of his horsemen. And for anybody out there who knows anything about Apocalypse and his horsemen, you guys know when that happens, your powers get augmented and you usually become vastly more powerful. Sunfire, as a herald of Apocalypse, between these two, could take all comers, right? There's no reason to believe they couldn't take down Orcus by themselves. So the question has to be asked, what happens when he builds his army up? Now, for the Juggernaut portion, the reason you guys clicked on this video. So what this does is this basically picks up at the main Orcus facility itself. Again, for those of you guys getting caught up, Orcus is an organization that's been attacking all the mutants and basically wiped out Krakoa, the home of the mutant population, and so on and so forth. And what we get here is a conversation between Dr. Stasis, Firestar, and Fei Long. Now, a little bit of catch up here for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with everything going on. Dr. Stasis is basically a clone of the original Nathaniel Essex, Mr. Sinister. That guy's long since been dead. And all the versions of Sinister, really the main version with the diamond on his head that we've seen all this time, was a clone, right? It wasn't until recently that we learned there were three others, right? Dr. Stasis, Orbis Solaris, and then Mother Righteous, the female clone of Mr. Sinister. But in essence, Dr. Stasis is kind of like the mutant, and I say that in quotation marks, who's kind of like helping Orcus take down other mutants. Fei Long is a guy who effectively took over Stark Industries, so he's got all the access to Tony Stark's technology, and Firestar is a mutant who's actually on the side of the X-Men, but Jean Grey of the X-Men before she died put a telepathic thought in the mind of Dr. Stasis, tricking him into believing Firestar has been working with them the entire time. So she's basically a spy. But one of the things they talk about is what had recently happened with Juggernaut. But for those of you guys who aren't really caught up, and again, you'll find all this information in the Fall of X playlist, Kitty Pryde of the X-Men had snuck aboard and then enabled the circumstances whereby Juggernaut could get free. He escaped, but then Nimrod beat the crap out of him, right? Beat the absolute tar out of him. And so in turn, what Firestar is doing is she's basically kind of maintaining her role where she's assigned to go to Cyclops, who's currently being held by Orchis, and basically tell him, take the plea deal that Orchis is offering you. In effect, turn against the mutant population, right? Walk out there in the general public and say that the mutant population are the bad guys. They're the villains here. That Orchis was right in their decision to attack the mutant population and that the mutants brought this on themselves. Of course, it's all a gigantic lie. None of it is true, but that's the role that she's assigned to play here. And so what she does is she actually moves past the Juggernaut's room, which of course, this guy is currently in stasis because the Juggernaut's just been absolutely pummeled by Nimrod. That just kind of gives you guys perspective on how powerful Nimrod the Sentinel is, right? That guy is on a whole nother level. But what Firestar does is she kind of like sneaks through, right? She starts moving through. And in fact, she actually goes into the room of the Juggernaut himself and then enables a circumstance that allows him to escape yet again. Then she goes into the room of Cyclops, who again is being held captive by Orchis. And she does exactly what she was told to do, right? She says, look at you, Cyclops. Actually, I guess introspection was never your thing, especially now. Of course, he calls her a traitor. And her response is, you're making what's left of your life a living hell, right? It's one of these things where she's playing the role, and she has to. Right? She has to look like the bad guy here. She can't sneakily tell Cyclops, actually, I'm the good guy, right? I'm here on your side. Jean Grey put a telepathic thought in the mind of Dr. Stasis and tricked him into thinking that I've been working with him the whole time, but I'm really on your side. I'm just biding my time and eventually we'll free you. She can't say that, right? Because who knows what ears are listening? So she plays her part the way that she's supposed to, even convincing Cyclops that she is a straight up villain here, that she turned against the mutant population. But in the midst of this whole discussion, there's this gigantic rumble, and then Juggernaut emerges. Now, this is why I say this is where Juggernaut stops holding back. And the reason why is because this version of Juggernaut is very reminiscent of the old version of Cain Marko, the one from eons ago. That guy didn't care, man. Like Cain Marko from like back in the 80s, that guy did not care. If you were a person that he was fighting and other people died as collateral damage, hey man, that's how you go. You should have been somewhere else. That was his stance, right? That's how he saw things. But in more recent years, Juggernaut has basically turned over a new leaf and become a hero. This is him reverting back to the old ways, because he says, I was about to check out of this gulag, but now that the traitor's here, I might stick around and have some fun. And he's like, they're gonna kill you when they're done with you, right? Like, consider what I'm about to do to you, mercy. And Firestar literally like blasts his foot. But then you have like these soldiers who kind of show up here. Juggernaut like kills them all like that, doesn't even think about it, right? Takes these guys out in one fell swoop, grabs Firestar, and then in turn she's like, honestly, I'm okay with that, now eat this. And then she gives him the like a thumb drive. And of course, following that, Juggernaut literally smashes through the facility and ultimately escapes, right? At this point, he meets up with the remainder of the X-Men, right? The remainder of those individuals who were still on Earth. Laura Kinney, X-23, Synch, Miss Marvel, and Kitty Pryde. Now, the thing here is that in this conversation, it's an awesome idea, because what goes on is the information given to Juggernaut was actually how to deactivate the bomb that was under Cyclops. That's one of the questions a lot of you guys had in the previous instance that we covered of X-Men, which was that Kitty Pryde couldn't simply just free Cyclops, because if she did, it would activate the bomb that was tied to Juggernaut. A lot of you guys were asking, like, why doesn't she just phase him through or something like that? It's most likely a pressure switch that's tied to the weight of his body, right? So if the weight changes in any way, boom, like Juggernaut dies. And it would have been a foolish maneuver to do, because Juggernaut, despite the fact that this guy is clearly not the sharpest tool in the shed, he's a guy you want on your side. Juggernaut is a guy that you want in your corner when things pop off. And so trying to preserve the life of Juggernaut and the life of Cyclops was no easy task. I figured we'd kind of nip that in the bud in this video, as opposed to doing it in like a different video. And so what ends up going on is they say, okay, cool, this gives us the ability to effectively free Cyclops. The question is, how do we do it, right? Because they say Orcus detected a group of mutants who registered the push into the gates of Xavier, right? When Xavier forced all the mutants to leave Earth under the direction of Orcus, they all ended up basically outside of all space and time, which is kind of a crazy situation. But the question of Miss Marvel is, where are we going? She's probably asking that question so she can do the same thing she's been doing, which is nothing. But one of the things that happens is that you have this kind of discussion between Firestar, Nimrod, as well as everybody else here. They're all basically grilling her, right? Because in their mind, they don't really trust Firestar. Now, because the telepathic thought is in the mind of Dr. Stasis, he trusts her implicitly because he doesn't know that he's been telepathically tricked. And as far as everybody else is concerned, they follow the direction of Dr. Stasis, right? They do what he tells them to do. Anything other than that, and they put their own lives at risk. But under the radar, they don't see her as an ally. And even if they did, at the end of the day, she's a mutant, right? They see their alliance with her as something that's temporary. When the time comes when all mutants gotta go, that includes her. Of course, Nimrod is watching all this unfold. I'm still excited to see what they do with Nimrod and like this grand scheme. But one of the things that kind of happens is that as Firestar plays her part, she challenges them exactly the way that you would expect her to, right? If you're gonna pull a dagger on me, at least use it, right? If not, then get out of my face with it. I'm gonna go take a whole bunch of pain pills so I can basically get over all these injuries that I'm sustaining and just go figure out what my next move is gonna be or await my orders. But their stance here is this girl's outweighed her usefulness, right? It's like she's outlived her usefulness. It's time for her to go. And so what we end up doing, and this is a crazy ending. What we end up doing here is switching over to Kitty Pryde and Miss Marvel, who have gone on this mission. Now, Kitty Pryde makes the most sense just because of the fact that she's like the deadliest X-Man in Marvel Comics right now, right? I mean, like Kitty Pryde as an assassin is probably the greatest thing I never knew I needed in the X-Men comics. It's dope, but they end up meeting with Wolverine because with Miss Marvel being here, I assume she's here either as a training mission or so that Marvel Comics can expose us to her as often as they can among the X-Men so we get used to it. I don't know. I have no idea what their intention is, but the kicker here is that as they're talking, right, her statement, the statement of Miss Marvel is, maybe we should talk later, right? Let's go find our mutant friends. Where is this? Germany? Austria? And the response of Wolverine is, you didn't tell her, right? Like that's literally the question he asks Kitty Pryde. And her statement is, I didn't even want her here, but our dear leaders insisted. And so the response of Miss Marvel is, you know, I find it hard to believe you were ever a teacher, right? Like you hate kids. Like, do you hate kids or do you just hate me? And she's like, am I way off, right? Is this like Austria or Switzerland? Now, here's the thing about this. They are in a place, right? The reason why they're here is because there are 5 mutant signals that have been registered on Earth in a safe haven that not even Orcus will go to. Orcus will not go to this location. And the reason for that is because to do so is a fool's errand. Why is it a fool's errand, you say? Why would it be foolish to go to this location? Because, my dear friends, as the 3 of them are talking, a voice chimes in and says, some good news, child. We're not in Europe at all. This is Latveria. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Doom has officially entered the fall of X. And I know you guys love Dr. Doom. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. As always, make sure you click this link to the playlist in order to get caught up, and I will catch you all later. Peace.